we are also in a generational leadership change moment, right? Where you have folks that have been incredible industry leaders for decades at this point. But when I see the sort of change that's on the horizon, I think it's a very logical moment in time to start looking either further into your organizations or outside of organizations for leadership that's going to bring that adaptability and that dynamism that's going to be required to be a winner in this world on the future.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast to bring together experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. Leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering. And we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Future of GovCon. We have a lot of smart people on this podcast, but today we bring one of the brains from behind the curtain, I'd say. One of the guys that's helping shape the industry, truly helping shape the industry. We're so lucky to have us as a guest, Tim Garnett from Oliver Wyman. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jake. Great to see you again. It's been a while, and we've known each other for a very long time, so always great to reconnect.
I think we met probably 15 years ago when it was still Avacent, and I was running a mid-sized prime, and we came to you for some M&A advice, as I recall.
I think that is correct. So yeah, full circle now, coming all the way around again.
Yeah. So, for the audience that doesn't know Tim or Oliver Wyman, I don't know how you wouldn't know him or Oliver Wyman, but he's a partner and the practice lead for aerospace and defense over Oliver Wyman, leading the charge, helping shape the industry in a lot of ways, and particularly through M&A. What's always struck me about Tim and his team is they know the most about what's going on in this industry than anybody. They're super connected. They got their finger on the pulse of the budget. They know where the capital markets are. They understand the big picture. So we're really lucky to have Tim come on and share some of his insights at a time which is truly historic. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And like you said, I mean, it's all about the team, right? I've been blessed in terms of having the right people around me for a very long time. Feel really lucky to be a part of the Oliver Wyman family now, post Avacent, and it's just exciting times, right? I mean, when you're an advisor, nothing's better than change, and we are in the thick of it right now. So looking forward to talking about it.
It's great. It's super timing to do this together. Tim, I'm not trying to prop him up too much, but smart guys did an economics degree at William and Mary. That's right. Not
Yeah,
your
political
typical.
science and economics. That's right.
It's not your typical GovCon feeder school, is it?
It is not. Although, in fairness, former Secretary Gates is a former alum as well, and very actively involved with the university. So we do have some good ties to the department and government writ large. And being a Virginia state school, you get a lot of Northern Virginia, either current, former, or future GovCon executives as well as government officials.
So you spent some time early in your career in Russia, is that right?
I did, yeah. It was, everyone always kind of asks. I grew up a Cold War kid, so it's not necessarily the logical place to end up, but this was the late 90s. I had a sister who had gone over actually pre-fall. I'd worked in the embassy, studied Russian, and was running a business there. So I had an opportunity to go over. And really, I mean, it was the Wild West at that point, right? Kind of 96, 97, 98. Learned a ton. I worked for an investment bank, had an opportunity to do equity research, which again, back to the political science side, it was just an interesting like life shift, right? I mean, I had always been fascinated by that, kind of Cold War dynamic, and obviously, lived more through détente and sort of the kind of perestroika age, which was really insightful, but it really opened my eyes to what capitalism meant and what emerging markets meant and what kind of opportunity creation in those new environments really could be. So it was a fantastic learning experience for sure.
It's amazing how things have kind of gone full circle, right? It's from an investment perspective and access to that market.
It really is. I mean, we still have friends who, I mean, frankly, made a killing. I mean, through the rise of that economy and some great partnerships with Russian people, and I mean some great friends in that community. A lot of them have been pushed out, have been frozen, have really had to change their lives entirely. So it was a and just seeing what's happening in Ukraine now, it's a very challenging thing to see, having lived and known many of these people, to kind of watch it secondhand like this. A lot of lessons learned, obviously, but it's interesting times.
So how did you get into government contracting? What was your kind of your entry?
Yeah, great question. So, as I mentioned, so political science, economics, kind of focus undergrad. Really enjoyed that intersection of government and business. And again, it kind of goes back to the days in Russia. You're watching, you're coming out of a highly government-driven industry into one that's trying to kind of work at that intersection of business and government. I came back to DC, where I wanted to kind of be on the East Coast, where I grew up, and found a really small firm at the time that was called DFI. Founder named Barry Bleckman, who recently passed. Great gentleman. Was one of the kind of original budgetary visionaries, right? I mean, he really built a business around budget forecasting, working for the think tanks, working for the industry, working for the department, and kind of stumbled upon this at the time, a 10, 12 person firm, and it just sort of felt right. My dad and brother were also former military. My brother was still active duty at the time. And so I had a really, strong tie to patriotism, to military support, like, passionately enjoyed that. Grew up going to Army surplus stores and buying canteens and playing Army in the Wood with my brother. So, had a very like strong draw to that world. Found this kind of very unique opportunity, and then kind of jumped headfirst in.
And so, from learning the language of GovCon, what was the learning process for you? Because it's been mainly academic and experiential in Russia. Did you, how did you kind of get in and learn the ways of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I started as an analyst. I mean, I kind of bootstrapped my way through the whole thing. Which again, for me, like that's how I love to learn, right? I love to just get in, get deep, and really try to understand before you can advise. But it's also, as you know, it's the right level of knowledge, right? There are thousands of people in GovCon that know a lot more than I do, but figuring out that 80/20 is really something I strive to do, right? Because sometimes when you're too deep, it's hard to kind of take a step back and see the big issues. And so, really, from day one as an analyst at DFI, I really tried to just find ways to make myself better, understand more. I mean, curiosity is king in consulting, right? And that's the one thing I always tell new hires. In some ways, your most valuable day is your first day, right? Because you know the least and you're most willing to learn. And so for me, that just kind of passion for learning, trying to understand, and at a time, and I think we'll probably come back to this later. I mean, unbeknownst to me in the moment, but we were really in a transformative moment for government contracting in the early 2000s, right? We came out of the Clinton administration,
The Last Supper was then,
the
right?
Last Supper, the NPR. I mean, people forget, but I think the Clinton administration had almost double the headcount cut that we've had in the Trump administration, right? Close to 500,000. So, there's a lot of change happening. It was also, as you remember, I mean, this was the original tech boom, right? So there's a lot of similarities to kind of where we are today, but this was when everything was about, Silicon Valley, venture capital. A lot of the work I actually did in the early 2000s was at that intersection of technology and defense. And so, I was learning that world, but I was also teaching government contracting around what commercial technology looked like. So it became a really valuable foundation just in terms of sitting on that bridge between government and commercial. And it's only becoming more important now.
That's the theme now. They want
Yeah.
commercial, right? They want commercial
Yeah.
solutions.
That's what they say.
So talk about you founded Avacent in 2007. What was kind of the purpose and the exigency around doing that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was, again, I've been pretty fortunate in a couple moments in my life and career. So Dr. Barry Bleckman, who, as I mentioned earlier, had founded DFI. He built the business in parallel. Kind of think old Booz Allen, right, where you had a commercial consulting group, a government consulting group. Post 9/11, the government group really started to scale fast. And so while when I joined, I think corporate consulting was 12 people, government consulting was 12 people. By 2007, I think it ended up being it was like 300 government people and 40 and 40 commercial people, right? So the business models had formally shifted, right? And so at that moment in time, there was a lot of interest in the DFI government services group. From an acquisition perspective, Barry was willing, like in a moment where he was sort of interested in thinking about stepping back. And so when someone approached DFI to acquire the government services, it created a moment of opportunity for the corporate side to kind of figure out what we were going to do. And so myself, five other partners, kind of went to Barry and said, "Hey, we would love to continue to do this on our own." And so, he maintained, some financial role in the business over a few years, but the rest of us took it, rebranded, and I just decided to go after it and really focus on, two things. One, customer first, right? I'm making sure we were always providing value add at a cost effective price point and with just a really high quality of service. And second, creating a culture that just attracted the brightest and the best, right? And I think we all learned that there was a moment in time for most of us where we came into this world and knew nothing about it. But again, find that curiosity, find people that can be great teammates, find people that were passionate about government and or military, and just try to build something really special.
I always like the name. What was the origin of Avacent?
So funny story. So Steve Irwin, who was our president and kind of spearheaded the buyout, um, just a genius of a guy. And we went around for 2 or 3 weeks, like, okay, let's do former generals, let's do famous squares, landmarks in DC, and we just couldn't come to an agreement. And so Steve finally said, he's super techie, and he was like, I'm just going to create a word engine and throw in a bunch of different words that I think capture the spirit of what we do and how we do, and see what comes out. And so I think ultimately it ended up being, we were a very growth focused consulting firm, so up and out. And so the ascent was the up, and the av was aviation and defense. And so I think it was kind of one of those. It was that time when word melding was kind of the way everything happened, and so that's what came out the other side. But it just felt right, It just sort of had a nice feel to it.
Now, you really built a great brand with Avacent and a great team. Even today, if I see a resume with Avacent on it, I say, well, that person's switched on and smart because they were part of that company. Um, Talk about the growth of Avacent and then the transition to Oliver Wyman.
Yeah, so when we built it, we had no real vision of what was on the other side, and again, the core mantra was just build something special that created great value and was a fun place to work, right? And so, we really did invest in infrastructure. A lot of our peers were, I would say, a little more cult of personality, right? You had someone who was a former so and so that, kind of had their name on the logo, or you had, just someone, a talking head of sorts. Again, super smart people, but so much of the brand was embedded in the person. And we very intentionally moved away from that from the beginning and said, look, we want to be an enterprise. We want to be something that everyone can feel proud of, and really, let everyone shine. And so that was really a core foundation to how we grew. As I said, I think we were 36 people in 2007, ended up about 140 by the end in 2022. We had gone from DC only to DC, London, Paris, Tokyo offices. We had people in New York, Boston, LA. And so we really, again, tried to create a culture that allowed mobility, kind of went to where we saw market opportunity or need, and really empowered individuals. Again, all of us were doing this for the first time. And so, we really tried to be our best, but also recognize that the value was in the collective, not in the individual. And so, that I think most of us came from liberal arts or multidisciplinary kind of schools. And just seeing, when you get an engineer, a mathematician, a tech guy, and a writer in a room, like good stuff happens, right? As long as you kind of share the same principles and values and focus. And so that was very much the core to the culture. We did a couple things early on. We recognized the value of data, and kind of proprietary data and analysis was really fundamental to what we did. We built a budget forecasting tool, ultimately sold to Jane's actually. But that was always a core principle for us as well. And just like you said, I mean, be smarter, be deeper, like really be curious about what's happening day to day. Don't rest on your laurels, and try to keep up. And, that was during a relatively, I wouldn't say static period. And, you had kind of 9/11 obviously was very dynamic. You had Iraq, you had Afghanistan, you had a global financial crisis. But in each of those moments, we just tried to stay as fresh and relevant as possible.
So I want to know your secret because maybe you could help me. Um, what's the one trick, the one thing you look for when you're hiring people, when you're interviewing, when you're selecting, when you're what's you put together great teams everywhere you went. You built a great company. What's been your secret to hiring?
It's a great question. I think a lot about where I came from, right? And you never want to try to create everything in your image, right? But you also want to recognize what you value and kind of what's core to your own success. As I mentioned, my dad was military, went reservist relatively early, but actually kind of went back to his farming traditions. He grew up on a beef dairy farm, some tobacco and crops. Mom was on a dairy farm. So like we grew up in hard work was everything, right? Hard work,
Yep.
efficiency.
Calvinist kind of
Yeah, absolutely.
work is good,
Stoic.
right?
It's work
Yeah.
is good and
Yeah.
good things come out of hard work. I mean, I always joke, like my brother and I, we had a wood furnace growing up, and my brother and I in the winter went out every night, got wood, brought it in. My dad, stoked it before he went to bed, and again when he woke up. I mean, it was very much a almost a farm lifestyle, even though we were in a very non-farm area by that time. So what I really look for, and this is hard to test, right? I mean, like, and it's not the only, like, hard work cannot be the only thing, but you want someone who know you can tell through an interview process that they are willing to put in the effort, as long as it's a contract. I mean, that's the one thing I always try to remind people is like I need to give you the opportunity and inspiration, and you need to in return, bring that curiosity I mentioned before, and then that hard work, the work ethic. And it's not just hard work, it's smart work, right? I mean, I think that's something my wife's been really good at teaching me. Like, I think for a long time, I was just like keep pounding through the wall. And she was like, sometimes it's better just to go around, and that doesn't mean you're not working hard to do that.
But you got a great track record. So, was it 22 that you joined up with the Oliver Wyman team, right?
Yeah, November 22. And so it's funny, again, as I said before, we were not building it to sell it. That was not where we started. Super interestingly, so Steve Irwin, who I mentioned before, his wife had started her career at Mercer Management Consulting, which became Oliver Wyman. And so a lot of our kind of core look, feel, principles, even style, came through what he learned through her experience at Mercer. So there was a little bit of DNA that went all the way back to the beginning. I think some of the team from Oliver Wyman started approaching us even pre 2007. So pre Avacent in the DFI days, we started to have conversations. A couple of gentlemen, a guy named Roger Layman, who's still with us here at Oliver Wyman, just really consistently said, really love what you guys are doing. If you're ever interested, let's just stay in touch. And so we kept in touch over, 15 years. Coming out of COVID was hard, I think, for everybody. We had some partners who were getting a little further on in their careers and, probably thinking a little bit about exit. And so, we didn't hire a bank. We didn't have a process. I think Roger called, he always called on like January 5th and would say, hey, like, how's it looking? Is this the year? And, every year Steve and I would kind of get on the phone with him and say, not this year. We're having fun. Not this year. We're growing. Not this year. We need to refocus. And then in January of 22, it was kind of like, let's just have a talk. And so we started the conversation. Again, culturally, we knew there was a really strong fit, like with just the way Oliver Wyman had been built. A couple of things had changed in Oliver Wyman in the 5 years prior. They had really built out a private capital group, which again, I spend a ton of time with now. That was really heart and soul of my focus, and a big part of our Avacent kind of value proposition was working with private equity. They didn't know what to do with it until probably 2019 or 2020. And then by then, they had also kind of figured out it's a great world in which to play and offer differentiation. And so being able to absorb that part of our business was really important. The other thing that was just super critical to us is, as we saw coming out of COVID, um, the focus had shifted for our clients from, purely up and out growth to really operational questions, right? Cost cutting, supply chain. Now we're moving into scaling. That was not core to Avacent. Avacent understood the customer as well as anyone, understood the markets, the competitors, the capabilities, best of class. But we were not good at down and in. And Oliver Wyman has a deep tradition in down and in consulting. Again, vertically focused. So, we are set up as practices by vertical, but then we have the horizontal functions that can come in and really at those intersections create incredible value moments for our clients. And so that was really the appeal for me. I mean, even if you think about it from a deal context, right? ton of buy side work, a ton of sell side work, some growth strategy in between. But it always felt a little bit like you were selling, an appetizer, but you didn't have any entrees to sell, right? You'd see your competitors come in, Bain, McKinsey, BCG, Oliver Wyman, come in and get these massive value creation opportunities on the other side. And it's not just about the financial side, but it's a little empty feeling, right? To
Right.
kind of watch
There's
your
plenty to
client go
do.
into this.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. You got through the deal and you want to be a part of the team. And they're like, you're part of the team, but now you're more, over on this side while we bring in the rest of the team. And so it was a very kind of culminating professional development moment to come over to Oliver Wyman. It's been a great, we talked about curiosity. Like I'm learning a ton, and that's what it really excites me here. Learning new skills, learning new people, how to go to market, how to create value, all of these things. You get to your late 40s and 50s, having an opportunity to really, learn something new doesn't always happen. And so it was a
Right.
pretty special moment.
Yeah. We'll start a podcast. You learn a lot.
There you go.
So tell me, and for the audience, talk about what you're doing now. You brought Avacent into Oliver Wyman. And just talk about some of the services you provide and maybe why it's different.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I now run the Aerospace Defense and Government Group. I actually spend some time. We have what we call Government and Public Institutions group as well, where I'm a co-head there for at least for defense and security. So we're doing a little bit of work directly for OSW and kind of DOW more broadly around industrial base, around transformation. Again, everyone is going through rampant change right now, and so we're very much trying to be thought leaders and thought partners in that transformation. The team now, I mean, globally, we're probably 25 partners globally, 250 people, depending on how you do the functional side. Again, probably closer to 500 when you add all the different functional layers in. Um, what's really nice is we are still very much focused on that depth of knowledge and customer knowledge as a differentiator. But then we can again come in at all layers. It can be digital, right? I mean, obviously we'll talk about AI at some point, but it's hard to get through, 5 minutes of a conversation with a client without something about AI. Addison really didn't do anything digitally related. And so being able to operate in that layer has been really meaningful. Supply chain. Again, we always advise suppliers, but we never really thought about it in terms of sourcing, pricing, supply chain bottlenecks, transformation, that sort of thing. So that whole value proposition has been really meaningful. And again, wanting to be a part of the solution for clients and being able to play in that space. And now we're on the kind of, if we get the supply chain working, how do we actually scale manufacturing, whether that's advanced manufacturing, next generation factories, all the things that we're talking about now, and how that's transforming operating models, right? What is IP today versus tomorrow, and how does this industry as a whole need to think about it? Again, just incredible conversations on all of those topics. And again, like uncharted waters, right? I mean, we are this industry, I love this industry in the sense that it's mission first, right? I mean, people aren't here purely for the money, right? I mean, they either came out of government or military, or they want to solve big problems, right? And that's a great passion to have. And I think it inspires a lot of people to work in this industry, myself included. But it doesn't always make you the most creative or the most, you're worried more about failure rates and, losing lives. And so while it has always been an innovative industry in terms of kind of technology development, doing it at pace has not always been core. And so I think we're trying to really help, historical industry or legacy industry really work that, but also the new industrial players really help them understand what it means to serve this community.
You're right. It's a whole learning curve for them. So that brings us to today, and we're at an interesting crossroad, right? I've told people I was down at Greenbrier at the PSC annual conference and listening, and I was just reflecting on the difference between 26 versus 25. 25, everybody's like, DOGE was happening. We didn't know what the administration was going to focus on. The priorities weren't clear. I mean, agencies were being shut down, and it was bewildering. And then this year, it's like, get ready. The train's leaving the station. There's gonna be a lot of money spent soon, and they're gonna spend it fast. And that was my takeaway from that. So we're at an interesting point in time as we look over the next 24, 36 months. And I know this is something you think about every day. So how would you characterize, from an industry perspective, how do you get lined up? We have this $1.5 trillion budget, which may not all come through, but some version of that it equals growth. How do you read through the noise and the budget line items and everything to figure out how to get set up to capture what will probably be I would guess, a relatively short duration of intense investment from the government?
It is the question, right? Is like, where are we and how do we prepare for what we all know is coming? And let's come back and talk about the timing because I think that's probably the biggest challenge facing everyone right now is like getting ready. But at some point, how long can you get ready without running, right? You start to get a little atrophy and impatient. So I think we're in a little bit of that moment. But I do think it's important to go back, 12, 18 months. You know, DOGE, I think, scared a ton of people, and I think, like, if you take DOGE for the philosophy, and I think if you asked anyone without a tie to administration or personalities or anything and said, "Could the government be more efficient?" Right? I don't think there's a single, person in the US that would say no. I think the philosophy of DOGE started in a very good place and actually, again, wanting to identify the inefficiencies, solve towards that. Again, you had thought leaders in place that were, truly transformative in the way they thought about things. I think there's also a reality of the way the government works that is, always a bit of a throttle to the pace of change. And so I think the administration's done a good job in terms of continuing with the philosophy of efficiency. And so I think, it's taken 12 to 18 months to figure out what that means. And so a lot of the noise, we had like a 72-hour rule with my team. I was like, guys, I don't want us to comment on anything for 72 hours because you just don't know what it is until you get a little bit of time behind you. And it's been a challenge for, I think, a lot of leaders and teams because it's been a lot of whiplash, right? I mean, you've just seen new announcements. I forget how many EOs came out in the first 90 days, but it was, I think more than the prior two administrations total. And so I think that, did create a lot of unease, uncertainty, and fear. I mean, honestly, again, for investors in particular. But you look at the impacts of what it actually has happened in terms of spending, less than a 5% cut as we kind of look at it. Um, Again, significant headcount reductions in a year. I think 290,000 government workers. But as we talk about government contracting, is that opportunity? I would say yes. I mean, again, if you look at the birth of the modern government contracting industry, it was during the Clinton administration after those close to $500,000 or 5,000 head cuts. And so I think, we're going to need technology. We're going to need, outsourced services. We're going to have to do things differently. All of those, I think, are kind of core principles to what DOGE was hoping to achieve. So now the question is like, well, where are we? I think one of the realities the administration also, I think, with their prior experience had learned was it's a lot easier to add policy and approach than it is to change or
Yeah,
subtract, right? I mean,
right.
policy change literally will take 10 years, right? I mean, just by virtue of working its way through our systems of checks and balances, which is important. So to do a full, while there's certainly EOs that are addressing, a far rewrite, and that I think will happen over time. In the meantime, you have created this sort of parallel acquisition community, right? I think there are going to continue to be questions on the legal side of whether or not they hold up. I think as some of the administration changes happen, uh, or political changes happen, you'll see more and more challenges around that. But we are now in a moment of time where it's like, okay, we have these ways to buy set up in parallel. We now have, this budget was really the first budget where you could see where the priorities were heading. And they had been as fairly transparent around big civil cuts, big increases in defense and intel. And now we're seeing that in writing. And so what we're spending a lot of time with people we kind of working on is like, okay, yes, it will happen. It's just a question of when. So between now and then, how do you start to tell your story in a way that the government or the customer specifically can get really excited about? And again, I think how you tell that story is going to it's going to take a real shift as well. We can spend some time on that.
Yeah, when I'm talking to a lot of the CEOs, I'm asking, "What are you doing differently? What are you doing differently now than you were last year? How are you getting organized to face this, substantial budget increase?"
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
think the
and a new way of doing acquisition. I mean, all these OTAs and this
CSOs
shorter
and
cycle times. And it should be shaping how they build their teams, how they do M&A. And this time next year, this money's going to be flowing, I would expect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, I think we are really on the precipice and we're starting to see in some higher priority areas, munitions, missiles, things that just have to move fast. We're starting to see the dollars flow. And so that's exciting. To your point on what do you do differently? One of the things that I think is a real challenge for leaders is really changing your face to market, right? Your actual communication strategy, right? For a while, I think there was a sort of us versus, like, industry versus government versus customer, and there was sort of a tension between that. This administration, I think, again, one of the good things certainly coming out of it is like this open door, right? Bring it to me. Come in. Tell me what you've got. Tell me why it's better.
Sea change.
Don't Yeah, and it's a massive sea change, right? And a lot of BD teams like aren't really structured to operate in that way, right? It was a work the back channels to influence the RFP so that once it drops, you're clearly in a pole position. But that's not exactly how this administration's working. And so the thing that we're also telling people is like, you've got to bring the solution, right? You can't go in with a question and say, well, what do you need? Like, that's not the way that open door works. The door works by saying, okay, I've got what I think is a unique capability. And it's not going to be just bodies, right? We don't want more cost plus T&M people. Like, we want solutions. And what do those solutions look like? How will you deliver it? What's the value it will create? So I think that commercial mentality is the thing that's really the sea change that I think a lot of organizations and enterprises are struggling with. And so we're doing a lot of just organizational change management work as well. Like, how do you make that shift? Right. I mean, how do you take people that have been operating under one go-to-market model for 25 years and say, no, now we're rewriting all the rules, right? That's been probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I see it. We do, most of what we do is business development talent for customers, growth officers, and capture. And you have the old school, which is kind of the old defense, right? You know, wait for the draft RFP, go to the site visit, get the RFP, respond. But the companies that are winning are the ones that are leaning forward. Not only are they bringing the solution, they know what the problem is. They're smart enough to know what the problem is, so they can take the 80% solution in behind closed doors, and then the customer says, "Well, we're going to use this contracting vehicle to get you to work," right?
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, no, and I think again, like if you're not willing to think that way, and again, I think it's unfortunate because I do think this ecosystem, the industrial base, has been so embedded, right, in the customer for so long, and for very good reasons. Again, not always the most efficient, but again, driving towards very mission critical, fail proof approaches. And now you're saying like, nope, let's rethink that whole thing. Look, I think it's good in that it's that rethinking has also opened the door to all the new entrants, right? That doesn't mean that those worlds need to be purely competitive, though, and I think that's what, like, we're in you mentioned the moment in time. I think there was at another boss at DFI, a guy named Brett Lambert, who you may know. Brett's been around forever and, served in senior roles at Pentagon Industrial Base, and he used to always say, at times, the defense industrial base looks like dinosaurs knitting sweaters. It was, like, his favorite thing, and it's such a great image, right? Like, this thing is coming, but as opposed to really changing, you're just layering up. I think the industry as a whole has done a very good job of moving beyond that, right? That was kind of more of an early 2000s thing. I think now there's a recognition that the change is real, the need for speed, innovation, pace, not always incumbent to the legacy industrial base. But they need to get better. They need to figure out new ways of doing things. I think there's a recognition that more dollars are flowing towards new defense, right? We're seeing it not only in the valuations of an Anduril or Shield AI, but just also in the amount of things that are being awarded and how those things are being awarded. I think there's now this sort of moment of it went from not a threat to wow, this is a really big threat to oh, actually maybe we should be working together, right? And so I think we're starting to see very early stage, but starting to see the beginning of I think more partnerships across because I think there's greatness on all sides, right? And it's really about finding the greatness in each part and bringing it together to make something that's truly transformative and what we need both for national security and for government efficiency.
But talk about the capital side. I mean, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, venture capital, private equity didn't really want anything to do with government contracting. And now it's I mean, there are programs, MBA programs on, VC for government contracting. So, wh how do you see this playing out? Now we have all this new kind of funding coming in, and I've had one CEO say the government's using VC as like a pre-filter for selection, because if it makes it through the VC kind of selection process, then it's kind of pre-vetted when it comes to the government marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the capital side of is the new lever in this kind of industrial base, the triangle, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's a square now, because I think this issue of like what is creative capital, who provides it, how does it play, has just gotten super dynamic. So early 2000s, I did a lot of work with venture capital, but it was how do I take things that were developed from DARPA and commercialize, right? So at that moment in time, we still had, a technology industry in defense that was ahead of a lot of commercial capabilities. I think that's changed obviously over time. And so, now you're in this other side, right? Which is like, can I take this incredible pace of technology innovation and adoption and apply it to defense? And I think the relationship has improved meaningfully, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that you had things like Maven, where the Silicon Valley and department did not see eye to eye, right? And I think that was a real barrier to advancement of those relationships. I think with Palantir kind of broke the mold a little bit and kind of came in and truly disrupted, and took a lot of arrows as part of the process, but have gotten through the other side now, and I think have become a really core part of mission capability development delivery. You then have, Anduril, kind of out in the front and some real money and focus behind it. I think the thing that people have, I don't know if they've forgotten, but this is still a multi-year process. Like nothing changes fast in government. I mean, even at the pace that we're talking about now, it took years to get here, right? It wasn't like this happened in one moment in time. But I think there's a greater acceptance of the need for that on both sides, and so that's really shifted the nature of the conversation a lot. And then you have the valuations that are following, right? And that again creates a whole new wave of interest and excitement.
Absolutely.
I think there'll be fallout. Like, look, there's no way with. I mean, I'm sure you walked around AUSA or any of these big shows, and there are hundreds of UAS companies, right? I mean, and now if some of them are selling to Ukraine, some of them aren't. Regardless, like there will be a fallout from that. There will
Sure.
be consolidation. I think you will have some category winners, like major winners in certain, either domains, modes, theaters. And so I think, there are going to be some first movers that have, highly justifiable valuations, but those won't necessarily carry through to everyone behind them. And so I think we are in a very dynamic time on the technology development adoption side. So that's kind of one bucket of capital, right? Early stage growth capital. And you've seen, more corporate venture capital happen across the prime, so they're gaining more access to that technology and financial access as well. Then you get to private equity, which is again where I've probably spent the most time over the last 15 years. And kind of a fun side story. I mean, really broad private equity interest in government contracting happened really right around the global financial crisis, right? And it was sort of a
Okay.
serendipitous moment, right? Because you had, if you remember, this is when Task and EIG, right? You had kind of the government customer saying, okay, Lockheed Northrop, you can't really do both. And so logical split. And there you had, billion-dollar high technology, high IP, very differentiated businesses that were perfect for, traditional LBO models. And so that was kind of the first wave of really big name private equity that had not historically played like a Carlyle or Veritas had. That's when you started to see, all the others, Blackstone, Apollo, KKR, GA, all of them start to really come in and look for opportunities, in addition to obviously Carlyle and Veritas and Arlington and others continuing to play. So, there's been a sort of 20-year history now of fairly consistent private equity interest in the space. I think the services industry is the one that I think in the last couple of years has really, I think, taken a hit. And again, more just because of uncertainty, right? What the beauty of investing in government contracting for a long time was at a certain scale, you had 5-year visibility. You knew your cost of capital was going to be relatively low. You could have a really good return as long as you continued to grow. And how you grew was just by being bigger and better, right? And there were some synergies through. the kind of buy and build growth that, created the vast majority of the government contractors in the 2000s. That's been a harder playbook to implement over the last couple of years. And so I think that's the private equity interest now has maybe shifted a little bit away from services to more manufacturing, because we know the scale up is coming, as well as software and technology. And so there you're seeing, like, not really VC, but highly capitalized, growth oriented private equity, Francisco Partners, Thoma Bravo, um, Bain Capital, like people like that with tech funds coming into defense in a meaningful way. And so that's brought a whole new, like, level of interest and capital in from private equity. And then the final bucket, which again is just fascinating to watch, is the administration itself, the government as a source of creative capital, right? And you now have, you know, senior leadership in the department, particularly in OSW, with incredible financial brains, right? And really thinking creatively and, and disruptively, right? In terms of, like, what is capital? Are we debt? Are we equity? Are we, a customer? Like, we can maybe be all. And I think really pushing the envelope of how to think about capital as a true lever and driver for change, right? And so that's the layer. It's earliest. I'm sure it will go through a lot of iterations and challenges over the next few months, if not years. But I think that's a complete new game that we've never seen played before. That's super exciting.
It changes a triangle to a square for sure.
It really does. Yeah,
That's
it really
brilliant
does.
once they do that.
Yeah. I mean, squares are pretty good structure. So
Before we shift to the future, I want to shift over because I know you've always been international, and just get your view on the European defense side. Now, I'm over here in Europe, and to me, it feels like we're 10 years behind, but we got 2 years to make it up. And mainly the not just the industrial capacity, but the procurement capacity. What do you see happening over here in Europe on the European defense side?
yeah, I mean, look, I mean, you obviously have the externalities, which is the return of the Russian threat and what that means. And obviously that feels very real and a lot more recent, probably, in terms of the implications of those sorts of threats on society, than other parts of the world have felt. And so I think you saw an important and meaningful shift in policy, and even more importantly in funding for defense, right? And so you saw the kind of, traditional NATO thresholds starting to actually reappear, whether it's 3%, 4%, 5% GDP, starting to really go back towards defense. And so while Northern Europe has probably always been the most, Northern Europe and UK have always been more proactive in maintaining that base, you're seeing the rest of continental and Southern Europe really step up. And so, we're now forecasting 11, 12% growth in defense spending across Europe over the next 5 to 7 years. Like, that's incredible, right? We never saw that. And so, like, there are a couple questions that creates. One, the demand signals are incredibly strong, as I mentioned. How does the supply keep up, right? Because this is an industrial base that's frankly been underinvested in for a long time. I mean, really fascinatingly, we had periods of time pre-Ukraine where, from a pure ESG perspective, you couldn't get institutional money to invest in defense because it was on the wrong side of ESG. Now that's completely 180, right? And so now you see institutional investors not only interested, but really prioritizing defense. You've seen 18 to 20 new dedicated European defense private equity funds being developed, right? And from the likes of Warburg all the way down. And so I think you've really got a ton of interest, but it takes time to create that industrial base, right? And a lot of the time and money right now, while the 5 to 7 year growth is really dependent on rebuilding the inventories, the capabilities, the infrastructure, all of that. The dollars near term have still been going very much into Ukraine. And so there's a little bit of, like, a two-track race happening here. Like, how do I get things out now to kind of support Ukraine? And then how do I kind of take a steadier approach to rebuilding? The stuff that's shovel ready off the shelf is still very much US IP,
Yeah.
US development, right? And so you're still seeing a lot of partnerships and kind of money flow from US through Europe and into Ukraine. But I think the prioritization has really shifted into redeveloping that organic industrial base. And it's not just, without the US. I think we're seeing some really creative co-production partnerships, with US primes, European primes, and/or industrial companies, trying to at least get manufacturing and production back into Europe and develop that quickly. some really interesting dynamics around trapped industrial capacity. So I think one of the automotive industry in Europe has gotten crushed, right, in the last few years, but some incredible manufacturing capabilities, right? And so how do you reharness this? It's almost like Freedom's Forge 2.0, right? Where you're taking, again, legacy capacity that's very good and positioning or repositioning to address the demand signals from a defense industry. And so we're starting some really interesting things happen with, what had been shuttered factories reopened and redesigned to address that need. So yeah, I mean, Europe for me is super exciting. You're in this world long enough and you're like, okay, well, how does this play out? Like I was, late 90s, I was still a part of the transatlantic acquisitions and joint ventures and all of those sort of things that were happening that created the Leonardo DRSs and BAEs and others, right? I don't know what it looks like this time yet. I think it's a really good question. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for collaboration, but I do think it'll be a little more organically European, and so there will be a new industrial base that really I think develops a little more clearly there.
Yeah, there's big focus on the sovereignty as well, especially of late. So we're at a
I have one
historic.
question. I actually have a question for you because
Yeah,
I think you and I met on the services side. That's something that is never really developed in terms of an actual
yeah.
government military services aftermarket industry in Europe, and so that's kind of I've had a few of these conversations like, wow, if someone could figure that out. I mean, you have the Babcock VT kind of UK side and PA consulting and people like that I think in the UK, that's a much more familiar kind of support services model. But if you're going to start spending this kind of money on defense infrastructure, like who's maintaining it, who's
It,
training it,
yeah.
who's doing the procurement in order to get the dollars spent, right? And so, like, I would love to see a couple of middle market services companies really start to emerge through this.
It's a huge gap and a huge opportunity. Yeah, they've ridden off the U.S. services backbone and infrastructure for the last 30 years, and so there is no main player, and it's a huge opportunity for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so head spinning, everything's going on. We're at a historic kind of point in time as we look at the next few years. Let's go fast forward 3 years. We're at 2029, and kind of cycle through this budget and whatever follows that. Europeans are on track. Let's see, kind of give your view of this Europe, not European, but the overall, the global defense industrial base. What do we look like? What do we look like from a budget perspective? What is AI? We haven't talked about AI, which is kind of crazy to have a podcast not talk about AI. What's been the impact of AI? What's the M&A market look like? We're in 2029. What's your view, Tim?
Great question. Look, I think, as I said at the beginning, like this is a generational moment, right? We are truly on the front end of transformation. I think we will still be in the middle of transformation in 3 years, right? I don't think it's like a snap and it's over. I mean, it's going to take time. And again, as you said, like the money's just starting to flow, so we're going to see a whole new wave of challenges around that deployment of capital, right? And I think it's going to put a lot of strain on um, again the acquisition force, right, which has already been hollowed out a little bit, both generationally, just in terms of people retiring naturally, some of the cuts we talked about earlier. So when you want to spend fast with fewer people, that creates its own bottleneck, right? Then you have a supplier base that's already, I think, challenged. And so, like, I'm hoping that in the first 12 months of this, and this is where we're spending a lot of time, it's really kind of getting all the businesses running at, like, a really strong level of capability. And it's not, again, if it turns on too fast, I think that will break the system before it even starts. So I think 27 to 28, I'm gonna do it a little bit of staging. It's kind of way my head works. Is really much kind of getting things in order and starting to respond to that scale up. In 29, I think you're gonna start to see, and I think we're seeing it already. Like we talked about this push for just commercial everything, right? I think what you're gonna see is a real bifurcation in the market between exquisite and commercial. And so, like, there are certain things, F-35 or fighters in general, right? At their kind of most bespoke, submarines, certain ship classes, certain munitions and missiles. Like, you have to have a dedicated capacity there and a dedicated industrial base that's really not commercial. There may be things you can do. I mean, we've seen what Elon's done and launch certainly challenges that in certain ways. But again, different principles in terms of what's acceptable and not acceptable from failure. And so I think there will be a world in which, the traditional industrial base is still very much focused on that bespoke, exquisite, and really mission critical in delivering that. I do think there in that world, back to the creative capital side, there may be some operating model shifts, right? Like what is, we've had GoCos forever, right? But what does like the GoCo of the future look like? And so you may start to see some of those trends starting to shape out by 29, I think, in terms of really pressure testing what inherently governmental organic capacity versus industrial based capacity looks like, and how do you partner better? And again, I think partnership in that most exquisite makes sense, right? Because you are sharing risk because you're sharing the mission, right? But I think for the rest of it, you're going to see there's going to be a lot of gray then, which kind of goes from somewhat exquisite to very commercial. But that's where a lot of the trade space and kind of dynamic competition is going to happen. And that's where your new entrants are really going to start to, I think, play meaningfully and take a lot of potential share in dollars because it's going to be attritables. It's going to be, again, higher volume, lower cost, all the things that, again, we as an industry have been trained not to do. Like, I think there's going to be a portion that we're going to have to learn how to do from a legacy perspective. And there's going to be a portion that the new guys won't be able to do. Right. And so I think by 29, you're starting to see that trade space really get active. And so you're starting to see some real share shift potential in terms of total dollars. And then I think there will be some purely commercial things. I think, what government looks like in terms of support. I think inherently governmental will be challenged meaningfully. And I think that's where the government contracting opportunity, again, it's really more just commercial opportunity as opposed to government is the customer, but I think it'll look a lot more like traditional business consulting, business services, and IT. Again, back to AI. Like it's going to be all tech enabled. If you're trying to do it purely with people, you're doing it wrong, right? And so I think it's really a shift in the mentality. Like I was joking the other day, like everyone wants an AI strategy. I was like, whoever wanted like a word processing strategy, right? Like the thought of like it's about enablement, right? Yes, it's making things operate very differently through technology, but like I think people are over pivoting to like using AI as the end all be all, as opposed to just thinking about it as a tool in your belt that can really make things operate very differently.
It's an interesting thought. These are interesting times. Tim, so good to have you on the show. I did want to pick your brain. I want one word that describes your gut feeling about the future of the industry from your seat. What's your one word?
Yeah, I mean, I still come back to just dynamic, right? I mean, one of the things that I think, if for better or worse, this industry, is used to a stability that is now a historic, bygone. And so I think, we all are going to have to be much more dynamic. I think the way acquisition occurs will be dynamic. I think the way technology is developed and deployed will be more dynamic. I think that the competitive environment will be more dynamic. I think as leaders, we need to be more dynamic, right? I mean, we were talking about this the other day, and again, you live it every day, but like we are also in a generational leadership change moment, right? Where you have folks that have been incredible industry leaders for decades at this point. But when I see the sort of change that's on the horizon, I think it's a very logical moment in time to start looking either further into your organizations or outside of organizations for leadership that's going to bring that adaptability and that dynamism that's going to be required to be a winner in this world on the future, right?
New brand of new brand of leader is going to be required for this for sure.
It really is, and there will be some that transform themselves, right? But as we also know, that's not always the easiest path for people when they're later in their careers. And so I'm really excited also just to see who steps up, right? I mean, like and the redefinition of some of these incredible brands with incredible engineering capabilities and brains, like which one really takes the step to really make themselves different, right? And is it organic or inorganic? I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Tim, so good to have you on the podcast. Look forward to seeing you around town. Have to have you back on the podcast a year from now. Let's see how we've done on predicting the future.
Yeah, just
Think you're
don't bring me
spot
back in
on,
3
man.
years and call me out. No, I don't want that kind of
All
reflection. But,
right.
no, look, Jake, I really appreciate you and what you're doing. I think this is a great, initiative. Always great to see you, and thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You bet. All right. To the audience, hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you enjoyed learning from Tim. Obviously, reach out if you want to learn more about what Oliver Wyman can do for you. And for everybody, join us next week. We had a great show coming up. I say it every week because I believe it and I know it, that the future of GovCon is happening right now. We'll see you next week. All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there, and you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.